The Hall of Fame voting is complete. We have three new members, and joining us today on the podcast is The Athletic's Dan Brown. We're lucky enough to be joined by him again this year to discuss the new incoming class of Hall of Famers, the voting process, and what it was like this year, and perhaps a maybe a bit too early look forward to 2026 and the really weak class we might be looking at next year. We got a lot coming up this week.
Well, like Gordon said, we're happy to have Dan join us. So, Dan, this is going to be your third time on the podcast. You are the first guest that we've ever had to appear three times on the podcast. So, congratulations to us.
What do I win? What do I win as the first Triple Crown winner?
Next year. How about next year? Go for four.
Us continuing to grill you about your Hall of Fame ballot, mostly.
Yeah, let's do
it. So, I don't think anybody was surprised that, other than Ichiro not being unanimous, that he got in. I think we all kind of expected CC Sabathia to get in. I hope we all kind of feel like, thank goodness, Billy Wagner got in, if you were a supporter of his, and that's done. And that Beltrán just fell short. And the other guy, I think the way that it worked out was kind of the way it felt like it was going to work out the whole time.
I think so. I mean, some of those other players that I voted for have clearly lost momentum. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of enthusiasm for A-Rod and for Manny Ramirez. That doesn't seem to be anything building for them. Bobby Abreu, I vote for every year. It's he's borderline for me. I can talk myself into it. I like him as a candidate, but he doesn't seem to be picking up steam either. So I think you're right. I think the people who have been deserving for some time, like Wagner, got the shot. I think Beltrán looks pretty poised to make it through next year, especially considering that we might talk about this later, but next year's ballot is not exactly chock full of slam dunks.
Yeah, Gordon already referred to that. Yeah. And you, so I agree with you on Manny and A-Rod, and I even was saying to Gordon before we recorded, going, it seems like they're just taking up space now, which bugs me to no end. But because they're blocking other guys from being considered because they're still there and they're not going to get in anyway. So that kind of bugs me. Maybe think, does the BBWA ever get all the writers together and in one place at one time during the year, and you guys like talk about stuff together as a group collectively?
No, if there's a gathering of the BBWAA members, it's usually just the active ones. So during the winter meetings, there's a gathering of BBWAA at the All-Star game. It's usually a discussion though about access and eligibility for BBWA cards, and if there's anything like that. We never discuss actual baseball topics. It's more that organization is really more about credentialing, access. There's been a lot of pushback from baseball in terms of they keep shrinking the media availability on game days. Usually before batting practice, you could go in and talk to players, check on injuries. If you're working on a feature, it's a good time to talk to somebody. But that window gets smaller every year, and the BBWAA is almost like a union that works together to say, like, hey, we can't do our jobs with this limited access. What can we do to, negotiate that?
The focus of it's much more on like, how do we do our job as writers
Exactly.
and write more about baseball rather than what are the topics we're all writing about collectively.
Exactly. I do like, though, in the lead up to the voting, when people, my fellow scribes, write about who they're voting for and why.
Yes.
I will say that when we talk about that, nothing about it now that we talk about at the BBWA meetings in the past, a lot of it has been, some of it is like, should all the ballots be public? And there's some sentiment for that. But they encourage you not only vote and share your vote, but write a column explaining why. And it helps me as a voter when I start seeing really knowledgeable people like Jason Stark and Ken Rosenthal, Tyler Kepner, some of my coworkers at The Athletic, anybody or even real contrary opinions about, why. You saw the case, people were making a case for Russell Martin, that his career was underappreciated. He wasn't the guy you would have thought about. It's interesting for me when my fellow scribes make a case for or against somebody, and so the conversation is happening, but it's happening, in the media space rather than in conversation.
your ballot and the thing that popped out to me, and I read your comments, and you're right. The Athletic writers did a great job this year, every year, of sort of here's, and Levi did his, and I got to read everybody's point of view, and I like most people, you don't always agree with what everybody does, but you appreciate that here's where they're coming from and why they felt that way. You voted for 9 players.
Yeah.
Okay, and you didn't include Andy Pettitte, for instance, and I don't know if I saw any comment on your part as to why he wouldn't be improved in where you are. And we might have talked about this before, but the idea that you picked 9, and you had to think, gee, I could have gone to 10. Why do you do that and not go to 10? You just strictly don't feel that anybody else merits that consideration?
Yeah, it's a good question. You guys might remember that I did my ballot this year with Ryan Thibodeau, who does the Hall of Fame, not like collaborate, but I invited him to say, like,
I remember that.
Do you want to see? He lives near me. I like him. I like what they do. I love the Hall of Fame tracker. I think they have great reverence for the process, and they, like you guys and like a lot of fans, they're just curious, like, how is it done? What do you do? What do you think about? So I had made my decision. I made up my mind to make up my mind before I got there, so that I wasn't really swayed.
Not waffling, right?
But just to explain how I got there. But they asked at the end, like, 9, anybody else you would vote for? And I think, A, that's a spot where if I still felt really strongly that there's a deserving Hall of Famer, or B, if there's somebody who needs a vote to stay on the ballot for next year. I hate when, because it's happened, deserving candidates don't get a long enough look. Kenny Lofton, I think, being the most exasperating example, like, he came and went, and I think if he came now and we have a better appreciation through some of the numbers and through some of the metrics of his career, he would be an easy choice for the Hall of Fame. And the fact that he didn't make it past the first ballot is exasperating. I thought, Felix Hernandez, who I thought about was going to be safely in the 5% zone that keeps him on the ballot. I just, Pettitte, Jay Jaffe does a great job writing about Hall of Fame candidates, kind of stacked up the starting pitcher field, Burley, Pettitte, Felix, and I'd have to go back, and I don't have it in front of me, but the stats he led, Sabathia was clearly ahead of the pack in terms of innings, in terms of WAR, in terms of
strikeouts, all
those things. He was clearly a cut above the rest of the field, and I thought Pettitte was below the line. So he was a guy that I thought I didn't feel strongly enough to click the box.
Go ahead, Gordon.
I think it's interesting with the existence of Felix Hernandez and his lack of career stats. Actually, I think in some ways really hurts guys like Burley and Pettitte, because as I, as a baseball fan, as somebody that did watch all of those guys pitch, I'm thinking, if I had to pick from any one of those guys to pitch a big game for me, I'm like, well, going on this basis of stuff alone and how I think of them as a pitcher, I pick Felix Hernandez. But if I'm going to sit there and be like, I don't know if he gets into the Hall of Fame, how can I then turn around and put in Burley and Pettitte, who I don't think are the pitcher that Hernandez is?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm a big Felix Hernandez fan. I loved him and I loved watching him. And I kind of was leaning towards voting for him. One strike against him was, you go to Baseball Reference, they'll give you a similarity score, right? And for the purposes of this podcast, I looked again at that list, and this is the 10 pitchers most comparable to Felix Hernandez in terms of just the raw numbers, right? You're not talking about aesthetic thing, but Cole Hamels, Kevin Apier, John Lackey, Jake Peavy, Dave Stieb, Kevin Millwood, Rick Rhoden, Frank Viola, and Bob Forsch. So not one Hall of Famer in the bunch. Really good pitchers. Some of them had very high peaks, but none of them are Hall of Famers. And those are the most similar players to Felix Hernandez. The other thing I thought about probably more afterwards is I tried to justify not voting for him. But I think in my lifetime, when I think about the most electrifying pitchers I've ever seen, Felix Hernandez would be on that list, but so would Dwight Gooden, Tim Lincecum, Fernando Valenzuela. They're guys who were like top of the world for a short time, but did not have Hall of Fame careers.
We might be watching one of those guys right now in the major leagues, because DeGrom's going to be a guy that's going to be talked about exactly like that, because he's not going to have the career length or the career statistics to probably be a Hall of Famer, but everybody will be like, if he just did, he would be. On stuff alone, he clearly was.
Yeah, untouchable. So fun.
As untouchable a peak as you could have.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about, using WAR, BWAR, FWAR, and all that as, helping evaluate, and we all do the same things. And sometimes, it's possible to sort of have that turn your thinking around. And I think in the case of Bobby Abreu, it's actually been in his favor, because I think without those kind of advanced stats, I don't think anybody would be thinking Bobby Abreu should be a Hall of Famer until you start looking at his BWAR and his FWAR, and you think, wow, this guy was much better than I thought.
Yeah, right. So I think that's the perfect test case of, the stats and what they show. Because I think, well, hey, Bobby Abreu, this is the Hall of Fame. Did he have the fame? Was he a star power? Would you tell your kids, hey, I saw Bobby Abreu play? No. So then I go look at the numbers, and I wrote this down before I came on too. In terms of what the Jaffe WAR system, right? That gives players a ranking, usually relative to other Hall of Famers and relative to their position. Ichiro's career is 51.9. Abreu's was 50.9. So 1 point difference. Superstar, borderline guy. And then if you go, okay, well, Ichiro had played in Japan. He came over and had this incredible peak in the big leagues. Jaw 7, which looks at the top 7 years of your career. Ichiro 43.7, Abreu 41.6. So not wildly off. So what I concluded with Abreu is, I mean, I don't think he would have been a star just because of his personality and his game kind of had that quiet, on base percentage element to it. But if we understood baseball now like we did then, we might have viewed him differently at the time. He wouldn't have been a superstar, but he would have been a highly regarded, highly acclaimed guy just because the stat heads would know his value. So I just I can't remember each. I mean, Abreu also ends up career-wise in terms of WAR, similar to Dave Winfield, a slam dunk player. So he's a tough one because I don't think that his plaque would almost be jarring if you saw it in Cooperstown. But how do you deny a guy who had a career like that?
It seemed to me, and watching Beltrán play in New York a long time, that he's just not quite Carlos Beltrán. Right? He did a lot of things well. Beltrán did a lot of things well. Run the bases well, stolen bases, home runs, on base percentage, all those things you look for, and a good contributor. But Beltrán had higher highs than Bobby Abreu did. And I'll get back to Pettitte for a second. So the thing that I weight more than other people do is Pettitte's postseason career. And look, I'm a Met fan, right? So for me to go up there and start raising my hand going, this Yankee should probably be like going, well, if you're not going to put the greatest postseason starting pitcher or one of the greatest, let's be nice about that, in the Hall of Fame, it's like, what did he have to do, because he kind of has counting stats that, you can go, that's what Hall of Famers have.
Good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, postseason career was. I mean, postseason. That's a big one. I mean, I always thought that helped was the best case for Schilling. Was his. I mean, he deserved it on his regular season success. But if you had any doubt, look at his postseason. It was absurd.
And that's what kept Billy Wagner out of the Hall of Fame, by the way. So Billy Wagner, for his 11.1 postseason innings, people, he choked in the playoffs. By the way, he gave up 3 home runs in the playoffs, and I think only one of them was a blown save. So I think people promote that kind of thing.
I don't have it in front of me, but where did Pettitte? I'm drawing a blank as to where he finished in the voting. If he came close, if he was gained anything.
Pettitte had 27.9%, 110 votes.
Okay.
This was his 7th ballot. So I thought he would have gained more.
Well, and I think it's going to be interesting to see when looking forward to next year, when you look at guys like Pettitte, when you look at guys like Andruw Jones and Beltrán. And I almost looked at a guy like Beltrán, and part of me wondering was like, were there people that kind of go, you know what? Not a bad thing to have Carlos Beltrán in our back pocket to vote for next year, just to make sure we can have a guy getting into the Hall of Fame. Because when you look at the incoming class for next year, it's like this year you had Ichiro, who you knew was a slam dunk Hall of Famer. And then there were guys on this ballot that even if they weren't going to be a Hall of Famer on the first one, like CeCe, you knew there was a chance they would end up there. There's not really anybody on this ballot that might even enter that conversation. We might not have any Hall of Famers from this class coming in.
Yeah, it's true. And those years have been so disappointing when nobody gets it, when there's nobody worth honoring, nobody worth celebrating. But it is kind of the class would take some pretty creative arguments to get those guys on the list on the ballot. So I do think it's helpful for Beltrán. I do want to, out of nowhere, just kind of make a note about Ichiro, and we talk about slam dunk guys and the fact that he was one vote shy. I wish there was I wish we could make a rule where for the first 24 hours after the election, celebrate the candidate for his career, for his achievement, for getting in with one of the highest vote totals of all time. And then after the 24 hours, then you can launch the witch hunt for the guy who didn't vote for, or the woman or whoever who didn't vote. Because it overshadows the triumph of the whole process of Ichiro is a Hall of Famer with an incredible career, one of the all-time greats. He got an incredible amount of support from the BBWAA, aside from one rogue voter. Don't make it all about the one rogue voter. You know what I mean? It happened with Griffey when there was 3 voters who didn't vote for him, and it just overshadows the important part.
What really interested me about the Ichiro thing was that it was important to him. That he obviously the thing he wrote about, I'd like to have a drink with the voter who didn't vote for me. But the point is that for him to say something like that, it's surprising that Ichiro drinks, and B that he actually that he cared enough to say that, because it revealed that he wanted to be unanimous like Mariano.
Yeah, and it was funny. We probably watch the announcements like everybody else. Josh Rawich says, Ichiro's elected, and he very notably did not say unanimously. Right? So Brian,
you knew right then.
Brian Kennedy's question, was it unanimous? No, actually, because it looked like, the Hall of Fame tracker, the Ryan Thibodeau, nobody had fessed up to not voting, and it would look like 100%. It looked like it could happen. So I think there was a lot of focus on it, but I wish there was just part of the fallout and not the sole focus, because it doesn't matter. I mean, if you could flip it and say he got a higher percentage of the votes than Ruth and Williams and Mays and George
Robinson,
right?
That's pretty good company to be in,
right? Which begs the question, like, why didn't the voters back then vote for those candidates? But I just think that part of it has become too big a deal. And I get, I wanted a unanimous vote too, and I too am mystified by the rationale. And worst of all, whoever did it has not come forward to explain, which is irritating. But disproportionate amount of attention on that.
I saw somebody wrote about that, who said it wasn't he goes, I knew Ichiro was going to get in. This is a writer I like, and he says, I knew Ichiro. So if I had a ballot, he doesn't. He goes, I had 10 guys I could vote for that didn't include Ichiro, because I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to consider Pedrioia later, or somebody that you really supported, David Wright maybe, and whatnot. And so because I was so assured that Ichiro was going to get in, I wouldn't have voted for him. I would have raised my hand and said, this is why I did that. And so that's an interesting perspective to saying, okay, what the responsibility of the writers is to protect your choices as well, right? Because you may believe somebody's going to be in there, and so that there are different ways to get there.
Right. I think when you start thinking about the plausible reasons, that is the most charitable. Like somebody had a very strategic plan. They wanted Pedrioia or Russell Martin, who might have needed to vote to stay on for another, whatever case they wanted to make, and Ichiro was going to sail in. But in that case, somebody should say so, like say in advance, like, but whoever it is also may have seen what happened post Griffey and how angry everybody was and wanted to spare themselves and their family that kind of torment. But
did the guy who didn't vote for Jeter ever? Did the guy who didn't vote for Jeter also?
I know, we don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Same thing.
Yeah, and I would say, like, also as a BBWA member, and like, I don't know, I've never heard any buzz that it's so and so, it's so and so.
Good.
I've never heard all the Griffey voters. I never heard anything.
I just think it's interesting because when you look at that kind of situation where you have the voter potentially strategically choosing not to vote for Ichiro, knowing that he'll get in. Do you think there's ever any value in potentially just being like, you could vote for as many people or as few people as you wanted, remove the limit of 10 votes, just because? What does having a limit benefit the voting process in any way, or would it lead to guys sticking around that really wouldn't have a chance and would just sort of, as we were saying before with Manny and A-Rod, clog up the ballot?
Honestly, that has come up before. Like, should we just remove the limit? I know there's a case for it because why not, right? If there happens to be 12 people on the ballot, 12 people, maybe 9 people deserve to go in and 3 more deserve to stay on, right? I can't remember. I shouldn't speak out of turn. It's possible that the Hall of Fame sets the parameters, because I think it's possible we've requested to remove the limit, but I can't swear by it. I will when I'm on next year.
Yeah,
I will come with a proper
we can
answer.
dig it up.
It's either why or why not the limit remains. The 10 people remains, because I would be open to just like no limit. If there's 12, there's 12. I don't think obviously I only voted for 9 this year. I didn't need more than 10 spots, but it's it's plausible. There's been some loaded years. I mean, there's been some loaded years, and the steroid issue complicated it because guys like Bonds and Clemens were on there for 10 years, like you said earlier, taking up space when they didn't get momentum, and some players may have missed out because there wasn't enough spots on the ballot to accommodate those guys for so long on one ballot. It got overcrowded.
You mentioned that happened to Kenny Lofton, who, when he was on the ballot for that 1 year, that was a terrific ballot. A lot of very worthy players on there, and somehow he got lost in the swell of people that should have already been in, that wouldn't have been there had they been put in.
Yeah, that's a shame. I look at that and it's just a shame.
I think he'll get his turn.
I was gonna say, I personally would be fine with them making a change. Like, if you get just any vote, you get 1 vote in the first year, you got to go to the second year, then you need the 5%. Like, that just gives you
interesting.
Just because that way, like, because there are going to be some guys that get onto every ballot. Like, I think there were 3 players this year that didn't receive any votes. And I think, like, okay, that's fine. They don't need to go on a second year ballot. But then that protects in a case where it's just like there is a guy like a Kenny Lofton in a loaded year. Okay, if I do give my vote for this guy, he's at least protected for a year. And now I can campaign for him a little bit. And then if he fails to get 5%, he falls off. But it protects cases like somebody just happening to be in, they come up in the wrong year and you've got too crowded a field for them to hit 5% that first year.
Right. And, in theory, the Veterans Committee is designed to catch oversights and misses and underappreciated players. And I'm still waiting for them to get Lou Whitaker in there because he's my...
Yeah, we're with you.
He's the snub that kills me the most. So hopefully Lofton will get corrected because that was a mistake.
The 3 players who didn't get any votes, who are obviously under the 5%, are Ben Zobrist, Fernando Rodney, and Hanley Ramirez. And nothing against those players. And Rodney had an outlier season in his career. Not that he wasn't a good reliever, he was, but he had one crazy season where he outperformed all his other seasons and a lot of people at the same time. But I don't think anybody is crying for those guys not appearing on the ballot any more than Carlos Gonzalez and Adams. Those are Hall of very good players. One of my favorite guys to watch, Curtis Granderson. I love Curtis, and I wish he would have hung around just because I'd like to see his name again on there. But as a serious candidate, I don't think I could have even made that argument.
He can be in the Hall of New York because there are very few players that both Met and Yankee fans will speak glowingly about, and Curtis Granderson is one of those few players.
He should be in the Hall of Triples because triples are a lost art, and Curtis Granderson is the last guy I could think of that really kind of brought the 3-bagger.
Had a 20-plus triple season, and no one's done it since. That's for sure. The other 2 guys, and we talked about Russell Martin briefly, and Brian McCann. There was like a groundswell of support early in the voting about, look at these guys, and they had much better careers than the pitch framing and all of that went with it. And I wonder if the fact that Posey's coming and Yachty's coming, that voters went, well, we're going to have to put those guys in anyway, and I don't think they're better than those guys.
I didn't think that per se, but I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. I mean, Posey and Yachty, they're going to be. I know Posey, as his career was winding down, there was a question: is he or isn't he? But I think with Bauer getting in, he's the most similar, like a very similar scenario. And Posey's remained in the limelight now as the GM, and I think it always helps when you're in the public spotlight and not forgotten. I think his case is going to be pretty solid. I feel pretty good about his chances. But yeah, those catchers are coming, and they are cut above the names you just mentioned.
I think it didn't help them. We thought it was going to help, but I think it had the reverse effect, actually. That, the horizon was, well, yeah, we've already put in Mauer, we got 2 guys coming, so enough with the catches already. And New York fans are thrilled, and I have to say, I'm personally surprised that David Wright made it to another year in the ballot, because I just didn't think there was the support there, and the hopeful little part of me as Mr. Met fan is to think, is he now on the Scott Rowland track?
So I'm curious, as a Mets fan, as somebody who watched his whole career, would you vote for him?
I think there are too many other candidates that I would have put in first, because again, I'm the kind of person to include. You have to get A-Rod and Manny off of there, and then if I could look at that and I had to get to 10, and Wright was still one of the guys, yes, I think I'd keep voting for him, because I think over time his career is going to look better and better, as short as it was. And Rowland, had some injury problems, but he didn't have the brevity of career that David Wright did.
Right, I thought the Mets go ahead.
I think I could talk myself. The longer he sticks around on the ballot, the easier it is for me to talk myself into really voting for him, because I think he's a guy with his career shortened by injury, and especially when you look at the drop off that happened because of the spinal injuries. It's much easier. Time is a lot easier. Like, okay, well, yeah, if he had just finished out playing his career like normal, you can clearly see he was on the track. And I think that's an argument that weirdly gets aided by time as you remember his playing career of being as recent. So I think Wright's the kind of guy I want to have as my borderline. Like, his career is kind of like where I see the line should be in. And he's the type of guy I want to be arguing about whether or not he should be in. Not some of the guys that I think are above him right now that aren't, like, my dad was saying.
Yeah, it's funny. You think about some of the guys from my baseball fanhood that are like that. We think, God, if they had just stayed healthy. I mean, Eric Davis was probably the best player I've ever seen for a short span. He was a supernova. And, I don't know if he needed that much more. Give him 5 more years of health, and he would have been a Hall of Famer. And I'm looking at Wright, just where he stacks up in terms of career WAR at third base. He ranks 27th. I want to look and see kind of who he's above and beyond here. But his career was so short. Okay, so he is, if you look just at WAR for third baseman, he's 27th. Ron Say is 26th. Josh Donaldson is 28th. Those are both really good players.
Not Hall of Famers.
Not Hall of Famers. Yeah. Below Robin Ventura, a few spots. But yeah, I don't know. Give him 2 more years. I like that the Mets are celebrating his career by retiring his number. They know what he meant to the team. They know what he meant to the fan base during kind of a difficult time. And seems like a good guy by all accounts. I've not dealt with him, but he was just a popular guy, good leader, Captain
America.
I don't think I'm going to vote for him.
Yeah, and again, my Met fan friends may kill me for this, but yeah, as I said, I don't think he's the guy to make the stand. Even if I try to excuse that, well, could be more third basemen. There aren't a lot of third basemen, so we got to put more in there. But we got Beltrán, who just went in there, and believe it or not, Evan Longoria probably has a stronger Hall of Fame case than David Wright. I can't believe I just said that.
You can edit that out, right? Or bleep it out later.
Right, yeah, that's kind of my problem with Wright, is I have to kind of create like a bunch of different hurdles I jump over before I can start entertaining the argument for him as a Hall of Famer. Where it's like, well, if I ignore the other guys that should get in for him first, if I ignore the injuries at the end of the career, like, it's like, okay, yeah, there's when you look at a guy like Evan Longoria who goes, okay, well, he did play the longer career, he does have the counting stats, and I still don't want to vote and put him in. Well, how can I turn around and put Wright in then?
As a San Francisco guy, he reminds me a little bit of Will Clark, who just meant everything for the team for not a short amount, not a significant amount of time. And he did not make the Hall of Fame, but the Giants retired his number anyway, because he was just such a seminal figure in that franchise at that time of the 80s, and kind of almost single-handedly brought the fan base back and reinvigorated. The Giants were kind of rudderless before he arrived, and I think David Wright did a lot of the same things. And again, the health derailed him, but so it's not the worst consolation prize to be remembered in your home city, forever. because your own fans knew, even if it wasn't quite a legacy, all-time career.
And Chris Mad Dog Russo, who is a fellow Connecticut resident, is probably Will Clark's biggest fan. And if he couldn't scream loud enough to get them to vote Will Clark, I don't know if he really had a chance. And I love that player. I loved Will Clark as a player. I just thought he's a guy you want playing for your team because of the way he goes about playing. I can say the same thing about Mark Grace, by the way. Just the same kind of, love those players. Do I think they're Hall of Famers? Ooh, yeah. Now you've kind of crossed a Rubicon a little bit.
Well, it is like just I don't know what it means. I talked about Abreu. You wouldn't say, I took my kids to see Abreu because I wanted to, like, you would say it about Will Clark and David Wright.
Yeah.
And who was the other name you just mentioned 1 second ago?
Mark Grace.
Mark Grace. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Memorable players.
Great point. A great point. Right. So that would have been sort of an argument against Beltrán, as he did everything so smooth and cool.
Yeah.
Were it not for the late, after his post-playing career, is what made it more notable than any kind of actions other than the huge series he had against, in the playoffs when he was playing for Houston that 1 year, where he went nuts and then got the big contract for the Mets.
Yeah.
But really, he was such a low-key guy. I remember when Willie Randolph was managing, going, I don't really think he's that fast, player, until I watch the numbers going by on the outfield fence when he's running to get a ball, and think they're going by really fast. So I guess he is running fast, to that degree.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you also about voting in general, and have you? We might have talked about this, but voters evolve, right? Their votes evolve, their thinking evolves, and I'm trying to get. Should you could have people argue, well, if you voted for a guy 1 year, you should always vote for that guy for the rest of time until you're no longer voting, because what changed to have him all of a sudden be out of the equation? Well, how do you manage that aspect of your voting?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question, because I voted for Abreu 3 years ago. Didn't vote for him last year. Voted for him again this year. Last year was because of the crowded ballot. But I still, evolve. I still struggle with that. I think when I was on this podcast previously, you look ahead, you said, would you vote for Sabathia? And I think I said no. But in the process of really, really, really studying it and reading others like Jay Jaffe make the case for him and doing the real homework, it became like super obvious. And I was, even with that, I was surprised at like just the overwhelming support he got right out of the gate, first ballot, because I thought he might be touch and go, but his numbers looked good right from the start. I do leave open the possibility that somebody could make a case for Felix Hernandez that I haven't seen yet, because I would like to be able to check that box. Who else? The catching, candidates that you brought up. Even the Russell Martin argument was kind of, it's worth looking at. And, the Pettitte, I might be in a spot to re-examine him more next year and look back at his postseason career and kind of how he stacks up now that we get the lens. Part of the reason that it's so long, right? You get the little lens to really appreciate somebody. I haven't been a voter for, it's probably my 6th year, and I don't really remember changing or struggling. Abreu is the guy that is kind of last check mark for me every year. And I do wonder, like, kind of what's the point at this point, right? I voted for him a couple of times going, I think he deserves it. And a couple of times go, well, I think he's worth looking at. So I want to see if we can get, not just keep him on the ballot, but start building some momentum. But it appears that effort is falling flat. So I vote for him because I think it's the right thing to do, but there could come a time when it's like, what? It's
and I think non-writers, right, not non-voters, like you have to. How would you do that? And so once you put yourself into that position, saying it's so easy to say, well, he's a Hall of Famer. If you put him on once, that's an easy thing for you to say, until you have to evaluate the ballot itself and go, well, wait a second. I got some guys on there now that Pujols is coming on, and Molina's going to be there, and and these guys. So if those guys are there, those guys have to get a vote. And so if that's a marginal guy, maybe I'm not going to vote for him in that case, because I can't put him over that other guy. I think protecting votes, strategically, as we talked about in the case of the Ichiro type voter. I think if the guy's a Hall of Famer, vote him a Hall of Famer. Let's put those guys over here, and then argue about the other guys that you think, well, if things could turn out different, maybe those guys have a chance. Andruw Jones next year, right? I think he's his 10th year next year on the ballot, so he is going to be up against it. I thought he'd rally. I'm not so sure he's going to make it.
Same. I vote for him every year. I understand there's off-field concerns for some voters, and they have pause. I'd vote for him every year. I think he's deserving. I'm a little surprised he hasn't got momentum, like you say, because sometimes the momentum is so obvious. You're like, next year he's going in. I mean, I think in Beltrán, you could probably say pretty safely, based on history and the way voting totals historically trend, he's looking pretty good. I will say, every once in a while I wonder about the, I don't want to say the cruelty of the process, but Billy Wagner made it this year, right? And the moment that captured him on film, accepting his, was just so deeply moving. It was so, I just loved it. I loved everything about. I love that he got in. I love that reaction. I love how real it was, and I love the voters did the right thing. Had that been flipped, and he get to the 10th year and he doesn't go in, like has happened with some other, like it's crushing. You wait 10 years on edge, and then get only to have the heartbreak at the end, and then you start waiting for the Veterans Committee. I remember Drew Pearson of the Cowboys. He would be a Hall of Fame finalist and then not make it. And he said at some point, why even do this? I can't take this anymore. I can't stand it. Roger Craig, the football player, lives near me. I would vote for him for the Hall of Fame if I had such a thing. He's been absolutely devastated to come close so many times and not make it. So I just as a thought process, we talk about people like Abreu and all the people staying on the ballot. Like, what is the humane thing to do? Is it does the Hall of Fame tracker make it kinder or crueler? Because it looked like Beltrán, I think, was above the line and fell.
He was
below the line when the buzzer sounded. It'd be an interesting story maybe for me to do, like, what's it like to be the borderline candidate, and are you okay? Are you at peace with how it is, or should it be more private, like, basketball Hall of Fame? It seems like it just comes out of nowhere one year. A committee announces a bunch of people, but there's no finalist, there's no cut down, there's no false hope. You're in or you're out.
And there's no public debate about the quality of you as a player. Like, I have to imagine that's also something that's got to be really hard for the players, is like, you're on the ballot for 10 years, and every year Andruw Jones has to go through the process of listening to everybody.
He comes on the radio programs. He's got to talk to everybody. What do you think? And go ahead, Gordon. I just want to say, Wagner wore it on his sleeve the whole time leading up to from last year, going, I really want to be in with us. It's torture. You said, what happens? It's torture.
It's torture.
Right. Exactly. And just having to go through that and having people pick apart and having to be like, no, I deserve it, and like having to come across as Wagner talked about it, being like, look, I want to be a Hall of Famer. I know that's people, it's like, you don't want to be humble and not talk about it, but at the same time, how could you not want to be a Hall of Famer? How would you not want that recognition as a player?
Yeah, it's I remember a couple years ago when Dale Murphy was still on the ballot, and his son went out and said, campaign for Dale Murphy. And people were sending him messages, like hammering his dad. It's like he wasn't good enough. He didn't play long enough. He didn't like he used to talk about the public debate can also be a difficult public debate, right? It's not unanimous support. People are tearing at your illustrious career and trying to find holes in it and knock holes in it and tear you down and compare you to others. And I do think those guys are used to fame. They're used to being in the public spotlight. But I do wonder, from a humanities standpoint, what's the best way to handle Hall of Fame candidates? And I don't like, the Basketball Hall of Fame to me is baffling. We don't know the process. We don't know the criteria. We don't know
who's voting for who,
why someone's in or why someone's out. And I think this, there's a lot of benefits to doing this publicly. If you're Billy Wagner and if you had just missed this year, or
you're Andruw Jones next year, that's got to be. This is my time. He's got to be thinking that now. Go, okay, well, we got rid of all those other guys. Basically, maybe this is going to be my year because there's nobody else coming on that's going to sort of push me down.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, now you voted for Chase Utley, and again, you're talking to two Met fans here, so we have to reserve our. And you didn't vote for Jimmy Rollins, and just from the Philly perspective, right, of going, okay, we talked about Lou Whitaker, Chamo goes in, Lou Whitaker doesn't. Do Rollins and Utley, are they together, or can we separate them and say, Utley belongs and Rollins doesn't?
A lot of that was positional. I mean, I think Utley, when you stack him up specifically against second baseman, in terms of the Jaws standards, he's 12th all time. He's ahead of Alomar. He's ahead of Biggio. He's ahead of Whitaker. I think that second basemen are probably underrepresented group in the Hall of Fame. So I voted for Jeff Kent for the same reason. Utley, I think, I don't think Rollins stacks up quite as well against the
other shortstops,
against the other shortstops. I didn't write this down, but I think in general his numbers, in peak were oddly had a significant edge. I do know that Jason Stark voted for Rollins, and that gives me pause because I think he's really smart and thoughtful about this. A Philly guy.
He's also a Philly guy, yeah.
Also a Philly guy. But he's a guy that I will look at a little hard next year. I just don't think that he, in terms of the other shortstops, that he stacks up with the Hall of Fame crowd in a way that he does.
So that leads me to ask you about Pedroia.
Pedroia. I'm a Pedroia fan, but he's a guy who might be the Felix. He might be the position player equivalent of the Felix Hernandez, where his peak was sensational but too short. And
he's got David Wright syndrome.
David Wright. I mean, it is. I think Bill James a long time ago. I think this is more specifically for pitchers. Was it better to have a short supernova career, like crazy high peak for a shorter time, or be really steady like a Don Sutton for a long time? But the conclusion was it was for the team's sake, it helps your chances of winning if you've got a Don Drysdale type, because that peak carries so much weight relative to a steadier performance. So I do think about that with players like Pedroia, who played for winners. He was on winning teams. I do think that could be an argument that he, in terms of value to kind of a juggernaut powerhouse team, he meant a lot. So yeah, he's a guy I'll look at harder again next year.
Yeah, we had Adam Dorowski on from Baseball Reference, and he's a huge, Pedroia guy. He goes, if that's not a Hall of Famer when I watched him play, I don't know what I'm looking at. And he kind of turned me around because I kind of felt, great player. When you look at it, going, it's a shorter career, and if I had to pick he or David Wright, it would be a really hard choice for me to put between the two of them.
But when I look at that, when I'm looking at guys from that era, to me, those are all the guys that I expected to be right on the border. David Wright, Dustin Pedrioia, Jimmy Rollins. Utley was always a guy that, because of his position, like if I ask myself, who would I rather have between Chase Utley and Dustin Pedrioia? It would be Utley every time as second baseman. Like I just as a player, I would generally go with Utley, just due to the length of his career and all of that. So I'm like, okay, well, if I separate Utley from them, those three, I'm like, yeah, that should be about the line of guys that are either in Hall of Very Good or in the Hall of Fame, and it depends on the person making the argument for each of those players.
Just as a side note, when I was talking about Roger Craig, when I was covering a A's Red Sox game, after the game, I saw Pedroia getting dressed in his locker, and he put on a Roger Craig jersey, and I thought, okay.
Now you're loving forever.
Now we're all right. So have remember that at voting time next year. I did a quick peek. Utley among second basemen all time, 12th in WAR, Pedroia 19th, so not that far off. The second base is a tough gig if you want to get to Cooperstown.
Yeah, if we're guys that are top 20 second baseman all time, and we're like not sure if he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah,
so you're kind of tough if you're top 20 all time and you can't make it.
Can't make it. Yeah.
Yeah, Robinson Cano is, not for the other stuff, would have been one of those guys even above that. But I think based on the way that voters seem to evaluate, I think he's got a long, tough road to get in.
Yeah.
So, So Dan, beside all the different types of writing, and folks, if you aren't subscribing to The Athletic and reading what Dan does, he does a lot more than baseball and a lot of very interesting stories, a lot of interesting angles. Maybe you can tell us what else you might be working on, so people can go take a look and see what you're up to.
Sure, I've got a story coming out. I'm really, because I like the Hall of Fame. I like the history and greatness from years past. I did a story. The Warriors called and said, "Hey, look, we're reuniting Chris Mullin, Tim Hardaway, and Mitch Richmond run TMC for a 3-point shooting contest. It's not open to the public. We're just going to film something. Do you want to come watch it?" I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Yes.
It's an all-star promotion because the NBA All-Star Game is in San Francisco coming up. So I went out and hung out with Run TMC, and Baron Davis was also part of the competition and wrote a story on their perhaps rusty shooting skills, but very sharp wisecracking skills, trash talking skills. Doing a story. It might be a while. I don't know when it's coming, but Babe Dahlgren, who replaced Lou Gehrig at first base way back in the day, it's his claim to fame, and had a pretty solid career. A little known thing about him is that he was a pioneer in terms of film study. He used to get the early portable cameras in the 40s and 50s and go film hitters and take moving pictures and study the mechanics of their swing, and then decided this could be a coaching tool before it was really done, and would hang up a sheet in the locker room and play the footage that he had of a player's swing and talk about, your hips are flying open or your elbows too high or whatever, in a time before videotape, before it didn't exist. So his Babe is long gone, but his grandson wants this little legacy to be celebrated. So I'm doing a story on teams actually hired him. They did not give him a very long run. Charlie Finley hired him briefly with the Kansas City Athletics. The Cardinals hired him. He worked with some hitters, and Jim Gentile, who is still alive at age 90. I tracked him down, and he remembered getting a little Babe Dahlgren film lesson. So I think that's kind of a lost part of history that is going to be a fun story.
I love that. I love that.
Awesome.
And Dahlgren, it wasn't for his playing career. Having the name Babe, by the way, and playing for the Red Sox and the Yankees, kind of, it's in there. But I certainly knew the player's name, but I had no idea about his history as the sort of a forefather of film study in baseball.
Yeah, he had befriended DiMaggio, so he had a lot of footage of DiMaggio. And he talked to him about hitting, but apparently DiMaggio wasn't super I don't want to say super thoughtful, because he knew what he was doing, but he wasn't the guy who just put hitting into words. Like, yeah, no, I go up there and I drive it into the gap and then I run to second base. He was
like, look, I got up there and I hit the baseball. There's not a lot extra.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of thing.
Kind of the opposite of the science of hitting. When you talk about Ted Williams, who, I guess you would have given him he could have kept you out there for a few hours talking about that. Well, Dan, we don't want to keep you too much longer here. Love talking to you. So, you may hear from us during the season if we've got something to talk about, if you're covering something. Really enjoy the conversation. Always thoughtful. You let us ask you questions that, I thought when I asked you about why 9, not 10, like that's great that we can have that conversation and sort of, get your take on it, because that's what I think the people that listen to us want to hear. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks to you guys for asking good questions. It's a good podcast that you're doing. And I think people love this. I mean, if you're a casual baseball fan, you love the Hall of Famers, and the process should be explained any chance we can get.
Yeah, thank you. And I think from our perspective, this is our access, right? We talk to somebody like you because we don't have access to major league teams and major league personnel. So we are trying to do this from the true fan perspective. We like to think we're knowledgeable fans, but to have you come on and talk to us certainly makes us look better. So that's a great thing. And we thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right.